first looking at Solidaritas by Dolorosa Sinaga, we can immediately connect to an empowered energy. Even though standing at only 29 centimeters tall, the sculpture, which is a much more modest scale than most bronze sculptures, we can see both a solidness of form and a softness in the handling of the material. All are joined at the hip. The women are linking their arms to fuse into one mass form. They appear to be singing or shouting with their mouths open. The figure on the far left also has her fist punching up and puncturing the sky, a symbol we now recognize as an emblem of the power of the people to protest. Instead of the sole individual hero sheathed in bronze, we have heroines standing together in solidarity. The artwork's title, Solidaritas, is a transliteration of the word solidarity in English, which means communion of interests and mutual responsibilities. It relates closely to the etymology of the word solid. In the 14th century, this term referred to something that was not empty or hollow, and in the 15th century, attained the meaning of being made of the same stuff. In Dolorosa Sinaga's artwork, the form and content are closely related. Solidarity is a subject of the piece, and it's also a solid, unbreakable, bonded material. In Indonesian, perhaps another word for solidarity could be kesetia kawanan, made up of two words, kesetia, which translates as loyalty, and kawanan, which means flock or a herd. It is as if this artwork is asking us how we are in solidarity. How are we of the same stuff, as part of the same herd? Apart from the figures within the artwork, and we can tell that they're an apparent reference to women, we know this through the use of dress, the pregnant belly, and that there is little else to mark precisely who these women are, where they're from, or what they're even fighting for. Dolorosa Sinaga's sculptures are often abstract in reference, but made in direct response to an event. Solidaritas was created to respond to the 1998 Jakarta riots and the discrimination faced by both women and violence against the ethnic Chinese minority. Because Dolorosa Sinaga has made artworks and teaches in Jakarta at Institut Kesenian Jakarta, these events would have permeated the discussions held at her studio, which in the early 1990s became a gathering space to discuss art, culture, and politics. She became involved in causes such as speaking out at East Timor's occupation by Indonesian military forces and against the assassination of prominent human rights leader Munir Said Talib. On the one hand is the solid, material, weighty aspect of Dolorosa Sinaga's sculptural practice, and on the other hand are the discussions, campaigning, protesting, and caring between individuals, which are the less visible aspects of her artwork. Her studio became an important site of study, not only the study of form and the body, as expressed through these artworks, but the actual act of study. Theorists Fred Moten and Stefano Hani loosely define study as getting together with those you trust and figuring out what needs to be learned. It's a form of commoning and communion. It is what Moten calls, quote, being committed to the idea that study is what you do with other people. It's talking and walking around with other people, working, dancing, suffering, some irreducible convergence of all three, held under the name of speculative practice. The point of calling it study is to mark that the incessant and irreversible intellectuality of these activities was already there. So arguably, with many of Dolorosa Sinaga's artworks, because of their focus on the body, which is something that she put attention onto during her studies at Central St Martin's in London in the 1980s, it makes the artworks deeply primal and abstract shapes and transcend into a political sphere of proposing a body politic. In her earlier artworks in the 1980s, the figures contort and swirl like crumpled tin foil blown by the wind. I'm reminded of whirling dervishes from Islamic Sufism. This tradition believed in the accessing of divinity through ascetic practice and through the harmony of love and the unity it proposed. Through the ritual of rhythmic spinning, with one arm concaved up towards the sky to reflect emotion towards the divine, whilst the other arm was pointed downwards, towards the earth as a sign to connect both. The link between dance and politics are well documented, but have another layer of significance within Indonesian arts. In pre-modern carving and bas-relief, many narratives involve the crossover between royalty, divinity, and dance as a passage between the two. Dance was a prominent way to access the divine and had a prominent place in communicating moral folklore, with many characters exploring human morality's duality, the idea of flirting with the shadow side. These dances within pre-modern sculpture in Indonesia are a confluence of religious traditions from India and localized animist forms. Many of them encoded different expressions merely through hand gestures known as mudras. Apsaras, for example, are sprightly deities who appear in pivotal moments of Hindu-Buddhist narrative, including being born of the story known as the churning of the ocean of the milk, which is a creation myth seen as the fight between heaven and earth and gives birth to the universe. Jakarta's urban fabric, where Sinaga has lived and worked since returning from London in the 1980s, is organised around colossal bronze sculptures made during Indonesia's independence era. These monuments were created by artist and soldier Edi Sunarso, regarded as Sukarno's favourite sculptor, commissioned to mark significant moments of Indonesia's independence. Like Sinaga, Sunarso studied abroad. He was at an institute known as Shantiniketan in India in the early 1950s. And here there was a style of pedagogy which focused on naturalism, humanism, internationalism, and idealism. These principles also formed the foundation of LPKJ, or the Jakarta Institute of Art Education, where Sinaga studied in the 1970s before being awarded the scholarship to study at Central Samarins in London. It is also these principles that were influencing the pedagogy at LPKJ, derived from Shantiniketan, that connected to an international current of activism which worked towards eradicating inequalities. Sunarso's sculptures, which were made during the optimistic independence era, exhibit flayed arms and upward motions, all capturing the fervour of independence which Indonesia gained from Dutch rule in 1948. These modern mudras, arguably, communicate hope, empowerment, and freedom. There are sculptures which hint to West Papua being enveloped under Indonesian rule. And Sukarno's fashioned the main inner city monument, Monas, which is in the centre, as a colossal lingayoni, an object from pre-modern Southeast Asia, which is often read through the lens of creation, territory, and the totality of existence. In 1956, Sunarso won second place in a sculptural prize in the United Kingdom for a piece called The Unknown Political Prisoner, which reveals how there are intersections between Edi Sunarso's practice and Dolorosa Sinaga's practice, even though they're years apart. It isn't easy to see the obvious political connections in Sinaga's artworks from the 1980s. However, the context of the UK, which she was exposed to, was led by conservative Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher. She was defined by harsh austerity, oppression towards the working class, the abolition of unions, and cruel police reactions to protest. These punitive measures were not wholly dissimilar to the despotic New Order regime, which terrorised artists and journalists in Indonesia from 1965 to 1988. Artists took the role of being involved in politics and made this an integral part of both their aesthetics and their life's work. A close friend of Dolorosa Sinaga, artist Simsar Siahan, was vocal against inequality. In 1981, he infamously burned a sculpture as a ceremonial act of protest against the cultural appropriation of marginalised ethnic groups, which in this case were the Papuans. And he saw these people as representing the oppression that the nation had against them. Like Dolorosa, Simsar Siahan also had exposure to a foreign art education. However, he was educated in Belgrade, which Indonesia became connected to because of the 1961 non-aligned movement, where countries along the global south, and that at that time enveloped Eastern Europe as well, banded together against being marginalised on the global stage. So while Indonesia was united as a new nation through the independence era adage, unity and diversity, This actually often masked conflicts and hierarchies between various ethnic groups within New Order era Indonesia. The importance of reaching across and standing in solidarity, despite being divided, became that much more critical. There are further instances within an Indonesian context where there are significant attempts at international solidarity beyond cultural divides. For example, the often cited Bandung 1955 Asia-Africa Conference was a state-led initiative during the independence era, and the common interest here was anti-colonialism and anti-racism. The image archive of Bandung shows a diverse political contingent in an emerging, different-looking modern world which did not just mirror Western modernism. Of course, these initiatives and their top-down focus were often short-lived and remembered as a failed attempt, yet opened up to the idea of global solidarity across nations, even when countries were divided internally. As demonstrated through artists like Dolorosa, the emerging middle class, particularly in Indonesia's urban centres, were growing in consciousness towards social issues. They expressed their discontent towards oppression through an international language of solidarity, inspired by punk and countercultural movements. Even though Indonesia was granted emancipation from Dutch colonisation, new battles centred around the exploitation of people and natural resources and the right to speak up against power and to stand up for others. The idea of solidarity gained a different register in this environment. The magazine Aktueel, published in Bandung, did so through politically potent and humoured means. For an example, a poem by the artist and poet Remy Salado called Asia-Africa Relations humorously discusses the difficulties of solidarity across continents, even though we're often fighting for the same thing. In light of this, I returned to Dolorosa Sinaga's Solidaritas, and the idea of getting together with others across class factions and social divides. Although there are different bodies on the line, we can see through the detail in the faces of the sculptural figures that there's something more here. This is something that art historian Hendro Wianto connects to through the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas and the idea of an ethical relationship to others. In the delicate handling of the faces in this sculpture, we are prevented from seeing them as merely being bodies or abstract figures. We humanize them because of the faces. Through reading Sinaga's artworks through Levinas, Wianto claims that within these depictions, they enable us to have a face-to-face relationship with the other, and therefore a call to an ethical duty within our relationship. Dolorosa Sinaga's artwork straddles that balance between a face-to-face interaction, between showing up for people in both her house and in her artworks, and making us confront the face in Solidaritas. Although bodies on the line can look different, we're still in a world where fighting against discrimination can be expressed through the simple yet politically powerful act of raising your fist into the air, where the body can be choreographed in such a way that means, yes, we're fighting for the same thing.